and this deals with soldering. Anybody ever soldered before? Did it right? Desoldering is okay. You learn, especially if you got the right tools. ETA, anybody know what ETA stands for? Which is no longer, by the way, ETA disbanded. Electronic Technicians Association. ETA, by the way, ETA for years set all kind of standards. They disbanded because, and they went to what they call the TIA, I think, telecommunication. What are the three metals most commonly used in solder? Electrical, electricity, and electronics. What's the purpose of the flux used in soldering? What type of flux is used in soldering electrical and electronic devices? What does the term tinning mean? What soldering iron wattage range is used, most often used for electronics? What is the first thing to do each time you pick up the soldering iron? Anybody know the answer to all these questions? So ETA is Electronic Industries Association, but like I said, they disbanded, by the way, in 2006. Soldering. Well, it's a whole different thing. It's not a chapter. The three metals we use in electronic soldering. Now, we do have what they call lead-free solder. We very seldom use that in electronics because it doesn't give us a real good joint. And also, lead-free solder takes a higher temperature to melt, which we don't like in electronics. So the solder that we use has lead in it. And what's the problem with lead? What's the problem with lead? Well, it's what do they call a carcinogen. Yeah, it basically kills brain cells. But what you have to understand is the molecules of solder are too big to be absorbed through your skin. So the problem is not handling solder. The problem is getting it in your nose and getting it in your mouth and stuff like that, right? You understand that? So what you need to do when you deal with solder, you need to wash your hands. You need to wash it before you start. You need to wash it with you. You need to wash them. Don't go over there in that name and use that disinfectants because all you're doing is disinfecting the lead, right? You understand that? So make sure you wash your hands. You wash it real good. What I learned was wash it and sing Old MacDonald Had a Farm. That's how long you're supposed to. Behind the entire side. Yeah, well, that might be. That probably is right. I learned when you soldered, you sing Old MacDonald Had a Farm, sing the whole song, right? And then that's how long you should wash your hands. Huh? Who taught you? The joke was. Let me tell you the joke. Now this swapped back and forth between schools. The joke would be I'm an Auburn. So they said an Alabama football player failed music appreciation. So they said, okay, we're going to put you in this room and we're going to let you enter this song. We're going to let you enter this song the whole time. And he said in there they played Old MacDonald Had a Farm. Old MacDonald Had a Farm. Old MacDonald Had a Farm. Then they got him out and they gave him one question on his test. They said, how do you spell farm? And he said E-I-E-I-O. I've heard the same joke for Auburn too. There you go. That joke's been around a long time. That's the first time you ever heard that joke? That's a good one. So we use tin, we use lead, or sometimes we use what they call silver solder, which would be, and these are the ratios. We have 60-40, which is the most often used. 63-37 is what we call eutectic solder. And then 62-36-2 would be what we call silver solder. And silver solder costs a lot more money, but it gives you a lot lower resistance. We use flux to remove surface oxidation. We use rosin core. So if you're doing plumbing and you're dealing with copper pipes, you need to use lead-free solvent, right? You understand? And you need to use acid core flux. In electronics, acid is a conductor. Y'all understand that? If it wasn't a conductor, we wouldn't put it in our car batteries, right? You understand that? So acid is a conductor. So we don't use acid because acid would eat up everything. And it's also a conductor, so it would create short circuits. So don't use acid core flux when you do electronic solvent. So we use what we call rosin core flux, which is basically pine rosin. And what's nice about rosin, pine rosin, it becomes very corrosive when it's hot, and then it becomes inert when it cools off. So it's the perfect, ideal thing. It doesn't break it down as good as it does rosin, acid. So sometimes we have to pre-clean these things with like an eraser or something like that. Tinning means coating with solder. Normally when we do electronic soldering, we use between a 25 and a 35 watt iron, and we always clean the tip every time you pick it up. Are we okay? Soldering, the purpose of soldering is to produce a physically strong joint between two conductors that has a low electrical resistance. An alloy is the combination of two or more metals. Soldering is the process of bonding together two or more metals with a third metal called what? Solder. That's right. Eutectic. The metal ratio of an alloy that produces the lowest melting point. It has no melting. It has no plastic state. So y'all familiar with steel? How do they roll steel? Well, they don't melt it. They put it into a plastic state, right? You understand? So they got to set a temperature. As long as you get above that temperature, it turns like clay. And then if you get it above that temperature, it turns into a liquid, right? Tin lead silver ratio. Solder most commonly used in electronics is 60-40. The numbers indicates we have 60% tin and 40% lead. The solder used in electronics is hollow with pine rosin in the center, so we use what we call rosin core solder. So what happens is the rosin has a lot lower melting temperature than the solder. So as soon as your iron hits that thing, that tube opens up and that flux just comes spilling out across your surface before the solder even melts. The preferred solder 6337, this is eutectic solder. This costs a lot more money. And why we don't use that, I have no idea. The predominant solder is 60-40. So that means it's going to have a very small plastic state. Very small. Are we okay? A wetting, this is another one. Wetting is the process of combining the surface molecules of a metal being soldered together with the molecules of the solder. So this is the way we get a good solder joint if we have wetting. So that's when the molecules actually bond together, right? Understand? And we can tell when we get that, by the way. Flux is a chemical that helps remove oxidation from the surface of conductors. The flux used in electronics is pine rosin. Tinning is coating with solder to aid in the transfer of heat in bonding. So the problem we have is people don't understand that is there's no way in the world I'm going to have a perfectly flat surface, and there's no way in the world. So if my surface looks like this, if I blow it up and the tip of my soldering iron looks like this, then basically the only place I would be soldering, my heat would be right there. Unless I do what? Unless I fill in that gap. So what we do is we coat things with solder. We deliberately coat it with solder. And we put that solder on it. What we have is we have that metal solder riding on top of our metal. And then that metal solder fills in the gap and we get maximum heat transfer. So the first thing we're going to do, every time you pick up an iron, I didn't say that, first time you're going to pick it up, every time you're going to pick it up, you're going to clean it off. And why is that? Well, anytime we heat up metals and we melt metals, we get what we call slag. Slag has very good heat resistance. So the first thing you're going to do when you pick it up, you're going to wipe it off on a sponge, and that's going to get rid of the slag, if you hadn't let it go too far. And then you're going to re-tin every time. So you got to get used to that, right? And sometimes you have to tin it while you're soldering. Sometimes you have to clean it off while you're actually soldering. Because you'll see that slag build up. Instead of being nice and shiny like the solder, melted solder, it'll start turning gray. When it starts turning gray, it means you need to do what? You need to clean it, do what? Re-tin it. Slag, impurities that rise to the surface of molten metals. Anybody that works in the steel mill understands slag. Yeah. Yeah, well, these guys, I worked at U.S. Steel.
I've been to hear that.
Yeah. Yeah, when you start pumping all that stuff in there, then you put all that scrap metal in there too, and it's got all kind of impurities in it, and that's what a lot of. This is a chart, by the way, that gives us a good idea. And what we got on the left hand side, this is pure lead, and then on the bottom across the top is pure. I mean, this is pure tin. So lead has a melting temperature of about 621 degrees. Tin has a melting temperature of 450. When we start combining it and we create an alloy, the alloy actually might have it has a lower melting temperature than the solid because we're melting it with, bonding it with lead, right? So here's our ratios. So we notice at 10% lead and 90%, 10% tin and 90% lead, it melts at around about 475 degrees. I mean, you don't melt, it turns into a what? A plastic. And then it gets up to 576 degrees, it turns into a liquid. So that means I'd have to hold my solder joint perfect that whole time while it's going through the plastic stack, right? You understand? Or we'd end up what we call a cold joint. And you can see as these ratios change, the melting temperature keeps going down and down and down until we hit 6337, which melts at exactly 361 degrees. It has absolutely no plastic state. So what that means, if I get it above 361 degrees, it turns into a liquid. If it gets below 361 degrees, it turns into a solid. You can see it. Your solder it'll be melted and you can see it solidify. The only problem is normally we don't use 6337. And ask me why, I have no idea. The most often salt, even though you can buy it, it's usually more expensive, I guess, because it might be harder to make. The standard solder that we use in electronics is 6040. 6040 is right here, which melts at about 371 degrees, and it has an extremely small plastic state. So we got to hold it a little steady when it cools. But when it cools, it's going to cool down real fast, and it'll turn into a solid. Just don't move it while it's cool. Make sense? So these are different fluxes. This is the one you're going to run into most often. That's the one I've seen most often. So your solder is and it automatically seals up, guys. So when you melt it and pull the iron away, that tip of that solder is still melted and it'll just seal up. So you can't see the tube. You're going to see a little ball of solder on the tip of your solder, and it's in there. But as soon as you hit that and it melts off that little, then the flux is going to come flowing out and it's going to coat your surface. And then the flux is going to evaporate. It's going to leave a little bit there. We see people that try to solder, they'll put the soldering iron on their iron, and then they try to solder with their iron. Well, what happens is the flux is gone. And now you're not going to remove any oxidation, and you're going to get a cold solder. So we'll show you that. So these are different types. We have a soldering gun, which I couldn't get to my soldering. Soldering guns are for extremely high wattage situations. The one we have is a Wheeler, and I think it's 75 watts and 110 watts. The problem is when we start soldering on metals, what does metals do with our heat? Now, what does your metal do with the heat? It sinks it away is what happens. So so in electronics, we usually deal with a 35 watt iron, about that. But if I'm going to solder like a big TO3 transistor, I'll show you some of those. And by George, you're soldering the case, and odds are you're going to have to use a higher wattage iron. Or if you get in some extremely big gauge wire, you're trying to tin like a 12 gauge wire. You can't do that with a little 35 watt iron because you're going to hit that copper. The conductors of heat pretty much follow the good conductor of heat pretty much follows the good conductors of electricity. So copper is an extremely good conductor of heat. So that means if you got a big gauge wire and you put a little old tiny iron on that and you're trying to solder, you're not going to ever heat it up because what's going to happen to all your heat is going to be what? And you're never going to get that thing up to 370 degrees. Okay? So depends on what gauge or what you're doing, which one of these you're going to use. And then we have different tips. Tips are usually a preference of whoever wants to use it. I like to use, this is my favorite tip right here, this semi chisel tip. But this depends on you. Which one are you most comfortable with? Which one do you like? And so most of your soldering irons, you can buy all kind of tips for the iron, and you can buy multiple tips. So if you're soldering across big things, you might want to go up to a full chisel, right? You understand? Or if you're soldering really little tiny things, you might go to this little tiny chisel, which is what I really like. This guy right here. So just about all your good soldering irons, the tips are replacing. We'll show you all the irons that we use. We got ours from Jamico. So this is the process of soldering. People don't understand this. What we're using our soldering iron for is to provide the heat. The soldering iron is not doing the soldering. What's doing the soldering are the metals you're soldering together. Anybody that's ever did any brazing, you don't braze with your torch. Your torch gets something hot, and then you braze with the metals you're trying to braze together. So what you're trying to do with your soldering iron is you're trying to get the two metals hot enough to melt the salt. Okay, y'all understand that? So we start off, we do what? First thing we do is what? Clean it. Then we probably do what? Tin it. Then look where they're putting the iron at. They're putting it on one side. They're making sure the iron touches both metals that we're soldering together. And then what do they do? Where do they put the solder at? On the other side of where they're soldering. So if it melts over there, what does that mean? Well, that means the metals are hot enough to melt the solder. And if it's hot enough to melt the solder and those metals are clean, then you're going to get wetting. Everybody understand that? Now sometimes if it don't take off right off the bat, then what you'll do is you'll take your solder and you'll touch it on this side until it flows, and then you'll move over to that side. Right? You understand? So sometimes you just can't get enough heat until you get a better connection, right? Or better heat transfer. So there's nothing wrong with touching the solder right here. But you always end up soldering on the opposite side. Away from the iron. Everybody understand that? And you'll see people do that. They'll come up here and they'll put their soldering iron, they'll put it on their iron, and then they'll take their iron, they'll put a big ball of solder on their iron. As soon as they do that, the flux is gone. You get down here, you put it on this guy, all your oxidation is there. Nothing solders, and you end up with a big blob of solder down there, and nothing's connected together. Everybody okay? And what we're looking for, guys, is we're looking what we call this fillet right here. So if I can't tell it's a good joint, I assume it's bad, right? You understand that? So what I've got to do is I've got to see the bonding between the metals. So if I'm coming up here and doing a part on a printed circuit board, and my lead comes up and does that, then what I'm going to shoot for is I'm going to shoot for a solder joint that looks like this. So I can actually see it bond with the eye, because it comes up and levels off. I can see it bond with the eye, and I can see it bond with the wire. But we'll see people, they'll do this. They'll come up here and they'll have the wire sticking out, and they'll put a big blob of solder across it. Well, what's the problem? I can't tell. Is it a good joint? You don't know. If you can't see the wetting, you assume it's bad. Right? You understand? If you ever see this, so if you come over here and you see this, and it comes up here and it dips down into it like that, that means you have oxidation on that wire and you did not get wet. So you'll see it'll actually dip in there. If you come over here on your eye on the bottom, if you come over here and see it do this, even though you got good wetting up here, if you see it bubble down like that, what does it mean? Well, you didn't get the oxidation off the pad, and it means you got a bad joint. If you come over here and do this, You don't know. It's way too much solder for one thing. Is it a good joint or is it a bad joint? You don't know. You don't know. Right? It might be perfect. It might be electrically perfect, but you don't know. And the problem is, if you don't have good wetting, it might come up and work for a day, right? You understand? And then, cause you're making one little contact up in here, and it works for a little while and then it stops working. And I'm not gonna tell you how many bad solder joints I've seen. We got a good, bad, and ugly, by the way. So this is on these, we're looking for this. On conductors, what are we looking for? So I've got a stranded conductor. By the way, we don't normally solder solid strand wires. We normally do what? Twist them together, and then we use some type of wire. But what we're looking on this when we tin these wires is we're looking to put enough solder on there. But what you want to do is you still want to see the strands through the solder. And if I can still see the strands and I've got good coating, then it means I've got a good tin, right? You understand? So a lot of times to splice wires together, solid strand wires together, stranded wires, we make them act like solid wires. How do we make them act like solid wires? We just tin them. We pre-tin them a lot. And then when I pre-tin them, one of the ways I can splice them is just doing what? Twist them together. This is what you probably don't have. Have you ever used a solder vac before? Well, if you know how to use them, this guy's in there. Well, this is solder splicing. Now this guy is using 12 gauge wire, and what's nice about using 12 gauge wire is that it's big. But the techniques are exactly the same if we use stranded wire. But what we'll do first is we'll pin. Okay, you ready? This is not going to work, but I'll put this. In fact, I'm going to pause it.